So let me go ahead and start. I'd like to welcome everyone to our global webinar series on sustainable ocean governance and the energy sector. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all those who have joined us from around the world. I see that we're already over 100 people on the platform. It's a great pleasure to have everyone here. I'll introduce myself. My name is Marisol Estrella. I work with the UN Environment Program in the Disasters Conflicts Branch based in Geneva. I also coordinate a partnership that we have together with the government of Norway, where we are promoting and strengthening national institutional capacities to reduce environmental and pollution risks, especially in the energy sector with a focus on oil and gas. But we are also increasingly looking at the social and environmental considerations in renewable energy, including offshore in our marine environment. Part of our work is delivering technical assistance and trainings to countries, but we also undertake global outreach activities to facilitate stakeholder dialogues on addressing the social, environmental, and governance safeguards in the energy sector. So our annual global webinar series is part of this global outreach of awareness raising and promotion of multi-stakeholder dialogues. So for this year, we are focusing on our global webinar series on energy development and sustainable ocean governance in light of the increased attention that we are having on the blue economy. More than ever, it will be important for us to recognize the opportunities, but also address challenges in the coexistence of multiple sectors, multiple users in our marine space, as well as multiple threats into ocean health and human well-being, including climate impacts, pollution, and biodiversity loss. So before I start, I just wanted to remind our participants who have joined us today that this is a recorded webinar, and that you will find the webinar recorded link uploaded to our YouTube channel, which you will receive shortly. And I just wanted to give you a quick rundown. If you're not familiar of the GoToWebinar platform, we will be able to receive your questions in the questions box. So you're free to type in your questions, and we will select questions from that box throughout the webinar. Unfortunately, we will not have the capacity to give you the floor to speak, but we hope to hear from you in the chat or through your questions. And I also just wanted to remind our participants that you will be able to receive a certificate of participation if you stay with us until the end and fill out the evaluation survey link at the end of the webinar, and shortly after you will be able to receive your certificate of participation. So without further ado, it does give me great pleasure to welcome you to our first webinar event and introduce our session moderator, who will also set the scene for our discussions today. So I'd like to welcome Ms. Leticia Carvalho, who is the Principal Coordinator of the Marine and Freshwater Branch at UNEP, who is based in Nairobi. She has 20 years of experience in environmental governance and sustainable development, multilateral negotiations. At UNEP, she has led the historical action against plastic pollution and helped to mainstream ocean and freshwater ecosystem-based management into a number of global and regional environmental agreements, and has spearheaded ocean literacy and advocacy. Her experience lies in connecting science and policy related to health, climate, maritime safety, and pollution. She is an oceanographer by training and holds a master's degree in sustainable development from the University of Brasilia. Leticia, welcome as our moderator, and thank you again for being part of our panel.
Thank you, Marisol. A great pleasure. Colleagues, partners, friends. Today, we embark on a journey to explore the immense significance of our oceans, often referred as the lifeblood of our planet. They are not merely a vast expanse of water, but a life-giving nexus with the power to shape our world in multiple ways. Our oceans play a pivotal role in regulating our climate, providing sustenance for millions of peoples, facilitating global trade, generating a staggering 50% of the Earth's oxygen, and absorbing a staggering 25% of CO2 emissions. Moreover, they are home to a treasure trove of biodiversity that enriches our planet's natural heritage. But over the last decades, human activities in and near the world's ocean have increased exponentially. We are seeing greater and faster change, as Marisol just flagged, with more rapid declines in ocean health than had been previously anticipated. Today, no part of ocean is unaffected by human influence. The triple planetary crisis facing our ocean includes numerous threats: unsustainable and destructive fishing practices, pollution from both land-based and ship-based sources, habitat destruction, the introduction of invasive species, ocean noise, ship strikes between cetaceans and vessels, the extraction of oil and gas, hazardous spills, and of course, the mining of minerals. We stand at a crossroads where the pressing need for an energy transition, essential for curbing emissions and maintaining global temperatures below a 2 degrees Celsius rise, intersects with the mineral-intensive demand and the deep-sea mining activities. By 2050, the world's appetite for precious metals is projected to soar by 500%, reaching an astonishing 3 billion tons of graphite, lithium, copper, and cobalt. We must strike a delicate balance between transitioning to renewable energy and preserving our precious ecosystems. The climate crisis should not come at the expense of further biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, especially in the oceans. Yet, amidst these challenges, there is a cause for optimism. We are witnessing unprecedented global attention and international traction on the front of sustainable ocean governance. In areas ranging from climate and pollution to biodiversity, the world is awakening to the urgency of the situation. This momentum is something to celebrate. What is really exciting is that we are able to come to the end of the road on some of these critical issues. Just earlier this year, the International Maritime Organization adopted the strategy on reduction of GHG emissions from ships, a monumental step towards marine decarbonization, as it aims to reduce CO2 emissions across international shipping by 40% by 2030. We have a legally binding international treaty against plastic pollution on the cards, with the third INC, that's the intergovernmental meeting, happening in Nairobi just next month. I speak from, by the way. In June this year, the United Nations adopted an historic agreement aiming to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, which cover over 2/3 of the ocean. Building on the legacy of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, this groundbreaking agreement significantly strengthens the legal framework for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in over 2/3 of the ocean. It provides an essential framework for cross-sectoral cooperation between and among states and other stakeholders to promote the sustainable development of the ocean and its resources, and to address the manifold pressures it faces. The effective and timely implementation of this agreement will make crucial contributions to achieving the ocean-related goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Whether on plastic pollution, biodiversity, or climate, these instruments in quick succession exemplify the international community's commitment towards collective action on environmental issues. It provides an essential framework for cross-sectoral cooperation between and among states and other stakeholders to promote sustainable development of the ocean and its resources, and to address the manifold pressures it faces. Looking ahead, these developments will place the energy industry under greater scrutiny, with increased environmental ambition and expectations for best practices. This webinar aims to shed a light on how these developments will impact the energy landscape, allowing governments to strike a balance between environmental priorities and development needs. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from governments and their practical experiences in this regard. Learning how countries like Ghana and Norway are moving forward to implement these global instruments within their national jurisdictions through their own respective national oceans planning processes will be critical. We hope to learn how Ghana and Norway are supporting multiple development sectors, including, for example, their offshore energy, fisheries, shipping sectors, while at the same time working to achieve their climate and biodiversity targets. I would like now to introduce our panel of speakers. As we move forward, please feel free to ask one or two questions, clarification questions after each presentation, but please bear with me. I kindly request you that you hold all other questions for our Q&A session, which will follow the completion of our presentations. I hope this is clear, and now I have the pleasure to invite from UN Doualos, Bingzu Li, a legal officer who will provide an overview of the recent legal and policy developments, including the BBNJ and its impact on sustainable ocean governance and the energy sector. He will also highlight 3 ways these developments will shape future government and industry action. Li, you have the floor.
Just want to make sure everyone can hear me and look at the presentation.
We can hear you well and see.
Great. Thank you, Marisol and Letitia, for a great opening. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. So I would like to first thank colleagues at UNEP for inviting the UN Division for Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea, or DOALOS, to contribute to this webinar. As you may have seen in the news and also mentioned by Letitia, the BBNJ agreement was adopted by consensus on 19th June this year. Its adoption marks the completion of a long process that started 19 years ago and represents a significant development for ocean governance. This agreement, together with other recent developments at a global level, and some of them are highlighted by Letitia, bring vital opportunities for reshaping human relationship with the ocean towards a more sustainable one. Focusing on the BBNJ agreement, my presentation aims to provide some food for thought for our discussions today on the implications of such developments for the energy sector. I wish to first recall, sorry, let me just push this. I wish to first recall that the foundation and the principal instrument of the international legal and policy framework for ocean governance is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, for which DOALOS acts as the secretariat. It has 169 parties, including the European Union. It's commonly referred to as the Constitution for the Ocean, as it addresses every aspect of the uses of the ocean and its resources. The drafters of the convention recognize that all problems of the ocean space are closely interrelated and need to be considered as a whole. As a framework convention, UNCLOS is supplemented by a wide range of global, regional, and bilateral legal and policy instruments adopted within the legal framework it sets out. This includes the implementing agreements to UNCLOS. 2 such implementing agreements are currently in force. The first is the 1994 agreement relating to the implementation of Part 11 of the convention, which is in relation to the international seabed area. The second is the 1995 United Nations Fish Stocks Agreement, for which DOALOS also acts as the secretariat. The BBNJ agreement, with its full title showing on this slide, I will say once, sorry, agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sensible use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, has become the 3rd implementing agreement to UNCLOS. To outline how UNCLOS and the BBNJ agreement relate to the energy sector, it would be useful to first recall that UNCLOS divides the ocean space into various maritime zones and sets out the rights, obligations, jurisdiction, and freedom of states in them, from sovereignty of the coastal state in internal waters and territorial sea to the freedoms of the high seas for all states. Although it is referred to by many as the High Seas Treaty, areas beyond national jurisdiction, which is the geographic scope covered by the BBNJ Agreement, includes the high seas and the international sea bay area. By the area of coverage already mentioned by Letitia, nearly 2/3 of the ocean are areas beyond national jurisdiction. Many parts of UNCLOS are relevant to the energy sector, some of which are highlighted here. First, as just mentioned, UNCLOS sets out the rights, obligations, jurisdiction, and freedom of states in various maritime zones, including in relation to exploration and exploitation of non-living resources. It also contains provisions on construction, operation, use, and removal of artificial islands, installations, and structures. The establishment of reasonable safety zones not exceeding 500 meters around them in EEZ and on the continental shelf, as well as the laying of submarine cables and pipelines. Second, it is worth noting that the drafters of UNCLOS were cognizant of the value of ocean-based renewable energy. For example, Article 56, which provides for the sovereign rights of coastal states with regard to activities for the economic exploitation and exploration of the EEZ, makes a specific reference to the production of energy from the water, currents, and winds. Third, UNCLOS establishes a general and comprehensive legal regime on the preservation and the protection of the marine environment. Under this regime, states, when engaging in all kinds of activities in the marine environment, including those related to energy, have the general obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment, and to take all measures necessary to prevent, reduce, and control pollution from any source. In relation to specific obligations, UNCLOS contains provisions on states' obligations relating to monitoring and environment assessment for planned activities under their jurisdiction. Last but not least, some other provisions of UNCLOS, such as those relating to the development and transfer of marine technology and dispute settlement, could also be relevant. So what is in the BBNJ agreement and how does it complement the provisions of UNCLOS? The BBNJ agreement contains a preamble, 76 articles in 12 parts, and 2 annexes. It addresses a package of issues with the overall objective to ensure the conservation and sensible use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. It contains provisions on 4 key issues and a number of cross-cutting issues. These 4 key issues outlined here on this slide include marine genetic resources, including fair and equitable sharing of benefits, measures such as area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, environmental impact assessment, and capacity building and transfer of marine technology. The agreement contains strong environmental protection provisions and key principles and innovations, including the first time that plastic pollution is expressly mentioned in an ocean treaty preamble. It has prominent references to traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities. There's a strong focus on gender responsiveness and gender balance, including in the composition of various bodies established by the agreement, as well as recognition of the ocean climate nexus with references to climate resilience. Given the time restraint, I will only highlight a couple of aspects of the agreement that might be of particular interest to the participants today. One such aspect would be Part 4 of the agreement on environmental impact assessment. The agreement contains provisions requiring environmental impact assessment for activities to be carried out in areas beyond national jurisdiction. One of the objectives of these provisions, as stated in agreement, is to operationalize the provisions of UNCLOS on environmental impact assessment for areas beyond national jurisdiction by establishing processes, thresholds, and other requirements for conducting and reporting assessments by parties. Furthermore, the agreement also includes provisions on the conduct of strategic environmental assessments. In another aspect, the agreement will enable the establishment of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas in the high seas and international seabed area, which is vital for achieving the 30 by 30 global target as agreed in Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Area-based management tools is defined under the agreement as a tool including a marine protected area for a geographically defined area through which one or several sectors or activities are managed, with the aim of achieving particular conservation and sustainable use objectives. Furthermore, the agreement provides for the obligation of parties to cooperate in capacity building and transfer of marine technology, and sets out various modalities. including that capacity building and transfer marine technology should be a country-driven, transparent, effective, and iterative process that is participatory, cross-cutting, and gender-responsive. In relation to institutional arrangements, the agreement establishes a number of bodies, including a conference of the parties, a scientific and technical body, and other specialized bodies under the code. It also establishes a secretariat and a clearinghouse mechanism to be managed by the secretariat. The clearinghouse mechanism will play a critical role in the implementation of quite a number of provisions of the agreement, including those relating to environmental impact assessments. In relation to implementation and compliance, I wish to highlight that parties to the agreement will have to take the necessary legislative, administrative, or policy measures as appropriate to ensure the implementation of the agreement. Each party will have to monitor the implementation of its obligations under the agreement and to report to the Conference of the Parties on the measures that it has taken. The Implementation and Compliance Committee established under the agreement will be facilitative in nature and function in a manner that is transparent, non-advisory, and non-punitive. Due to lack of time, I will not go into other aspects of the agreement, but I wish to say a few words about the next steps. The agreement has been open for signature since 20 September this year and will enter into force after 60 ratifications. As of now, 81 states and the European Union have already signed the agreement. The agreement designates the Secretary General of the United Nations as its depository and requires the SG to convene the first meeting of the COP to the agreement no later than 1 year after its entry into force. As requested by the agreement and the General Assembly Resolution 77/321, the Secretary General, through dualos, performs the secretary function until the new secretary established under the agreement commences its functions. In his remarks at adoption of the agreement, the Secretary General urged all states to spare no effort to ensure that the agreement enters into force and called on them to act without delay to sign and ratify it as soon as possible. Before I conclude, I wish to also briefly mention some other relevant developments which might be directly or indirectly relevant to the energy sector, some of which already mentioned by Letitia. First, the UN General Assembly continues to play an important role in providing policy guidance on the sustainable development of the ocean and its resources, including through its annual resolutions on oceans and law of the sea. In relation to the energy sector, it is noted that General Assembly, for example, in its resolution 77/248, welcomed the increasing attention being given to the ocean-based renewable energy and stressed the importance of EIA for ocean-based renewable energy projects. In relation to Sustainable Development Goal 14 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the 2022 United Nations Ocean Conference to support the implementation of Goal 14 took place in June 2022 in Lisbon, Portugal, focusing on scaling up ocean action based on science and innovation. In the political declaration adopted at the conference and endorsed by the General Assembly, entitled Our Ocean, Our Future, Our Responsibility, states highlighted the importance of increasing the use of renewable energy technologies, especially ocean-based technologies, in addressing climate change. The General Assembly's Resolution 77/242 also decided to convene the 2025 UN Ocean Conference in France in June 2025, with its modalities being negotiated at the moment. On the UN regular process for the global reporting and assessment of the state of marine environment, including socio-economic aspects, which produces the World Ocean Assessment. The second World Ocean Assessment, which was launched in 2021, contains several chapters on offshore hydrocarbons, marine renewable energy, and marine hydrates. The third World Ocean Assessment is currently being developed under the third cycle of the regular process. Ocean-based renewable energy was also the focus of the 13th meeting of the United Nations informal consultative process on oceans and law of the sea in 2012, and was featured in discussions this year during the 23rd meeting of that process under the theme New Maritime Technologies, Challenges and Opportunities. Already mentioned earlier, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework adopted at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biodiversity Framework contains a new set of global goals and targets for biodiversity, including marine and coastal biodiversity. In particular, target for effective conserving and managing at least 30% of the world's coastal and marine areas and for ensuring effective restoration of at least 30% of areas of degraded terrestrial inland water and coastal and marine ecosystems. In relation to shipping, Letitia already mentioned the adoption of the 2023 IMO strategy on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from ships, and this follows IMO 2020 regulation that limits sulfur in ships' fuel oil to a maximum 0.5%. In relation to the implementation of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, several of the 10 challenges this process aims to address are relevant to the energy sector, including Challenge 4 on developing a sustainable and equitable ocean economy. Of course, there are also other ongoing processes on legally binding instruments. Tisha mentioned the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on the legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution, including the marine environment. But there are also ongoing work under the International Seabed Authority on the draft regulations on exploitation of mineral resources in the area. To conclude my presentation, I have been asked to highlight 3 ways these developments will shape future government and industry action. In this regard, I wish to share these 3 points to facilitate our discussions. First, these developments contribute to further strengthening the international legal and policy framework for the sustainable development of the ocean and its resources. With states adopting legislative, administrative, or policy measures and taking initiatives to implement their obligations or commitments on the international instruments, national regulatory frameworks will also be further strengthened. This will help ensure that human activities in the ocean, including those energy-related activities, are carried out in a sustainable manner and contribute to addressing the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Second, many of such developments reflect a trend towards a more integrated and coordinated approaches in ocean management. This is particularly reflected in the BBNJ agreement, which is the first comprehensive cross-sectoral ocean treaty in decades after UNCLOS. By establishing specific mechanism for cross-sectoral cooperation to implement its various provisions, the agreement has the potential to have a profound impact on reshaping ocean governance towards more integrated and holistic approaches. The implementation of the BBNJ agreement at the national level will also bring important opportunities for promoting integrated, coordinated, cross-sectoral ocean management at the national level, which could benefit both the government and the industry. Third, many of such developments reflect a shared vision or a momentum towards increasing scientific knowledge and technology development and transfer. This further reflects the increased recognition of the critical importance of science-based decision-making, technological innovation, and the need for inclusive, equitable, and effective cooperation. The energy sector can certainly contribute to and benefit from this momentum. With that, I conclude my presentation, and I look forward to our discussions later. Thank you, Letitia, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Mingzu Li. It was excellent to listening to very rich presentation about just such an intricate and complex agreement, but crucial for what comes next for humanity and for the ocean. I have one question from the audience that I want to put to you in the sake of ensure some complementarity. And the question is from Mabel Uganda. And you mentioned, I've heard from your presentation, you mentioned very clearly there are connections of the BBNJ and the law of the sea and agreements addressing pollution. You mentioned the plastics one that's underway. You mentioned the GAG ships or ship emissions control that was put in place. Our friends in the audience would like to know if there are other legal and policy documents and instruments that are already in place to regulate oceans, and what are, or if Doualos has a vision about the best practices adopted so far to regulate pollution in the ocean. Over.
Thank you, Letitia. Yes, I think you mentioned that I had briefly mentioned, because UNCLOS Part 12 established a general framework legal regime, and so on the protection and preservation of the marine environment. So it is I think it was considered framework because the provisions of that regime foresees that there will be further rules and regulations to be adopted by competent international organizations on specific source of pollution, such as from land-based pollution and from from the vessels and from the seabed activities, all those. And so in part 11 of the convention also contains a particular provision on the protection of the marine environment in the area. So to put simply, yes, there are a lot of instruments development under relevant competent international organizations. All those form part of the legal regime on the protection preservation of the marine environment and based under the framework established by the UNCLOS Part 12. So I don't think we have enough time to list all the instruments adopted under competent international organizations. This presentation just highlighted some and most recent developments. And so, but those actually in addition to what are already in place. And one example I mentioned, but I didn't specifically go into details, is the, for example, the IMO 2020 regulation, which is actually a regulation under the MAPO Convention, so which is International Convention on the Pollution from Ships. So I probably just will use the example and the description of how this general framework supplemented by various instruments under competent international organizations to answer your question. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Brilliant and sharp. Thanks for the complementation. So with that, now I will hold for all the questions because I'm sure they will come and take them to the question and answers. But now I would like to give the floor and take us from the overarching governance arrangements to a country experience. So from Ghana, we are pleased to have Kofi Abogad, who will provide an insight into the opportunities and challenges in the sustainable ocean planning processes in Ghana, including country-level experience on balancing the existing offshore oil and gas sector with environmental concerns and other development sectors like fishing or shipping to achieve the current climate and biodiversity targets. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Abogad. He's the director of Han Mapoeno, a leading Ghanaian non-profit organization providing policy and extension support to government, fisheries industry, maritime, and fishing communities. Mr. Kofi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Leticia. Good afternoon to our audience. Good morning and good evening, wherever you may be. Warm greetings from Ghana. My task this afternoon is to expose level of country experience relative to the SOP planning process and also energy development and conflicts around the fisheries sector. So if I have to set the scene, I would say that Ghana is a coastal country with about 550 kilometers of coastline and 220,000 square kilometers of space. Near shore, we have lagoons, we have estuaries, rivers, wetlands, and mangroves. Now there are a number of resources and infrastructure around the marine space. And these include fishing, oil and gas, wildlife, ports and harbors, shipping, transportation, tourism, and communications infrastructure. The cardinal issue here is that there are multiple resources, multiple institutions, multiple users, and multiple uses. Going forward, I'd like to say that this ocean space has a lot of pressures, both the coastal areas and in the marine. These include overfishing, illegal fishing, oil and gas exploration, mangroves degradation, coastal pollution, coastal protection works, coastal tourism, and climate stressors. All these you can see very clearly that even pollution from the land-based sources all enter into the marine environment. However, Ghana has come very far participating in global discussions and debates around international instruments and frameworks, from the UNCLOS to the BBNJ. Ghana has been part of all these discussions and have been able to domesticate these discussions at the international level to the national level, and has found its way into our laws and policies. So around the marine environment, there are so many laws, policies, frameworks that guide the management and governance of the ocean space. But then with all these, there are issues and instruments that ensure the balance between the existing frameworks that has already been there before oil and gas exploration began a decade and over in Ghana. Moving on, we can say that our president has been part of the ocean panel that has come up with some objectives that our countries must ensure that they are adhering to the transformation agenda, which simply says that protect, produce, and prosper from the ocean. So therefore, if the ocean occupies 70% of the planet, it means that if we are getting all our resources from the 30% on land, there is more to be had from the oceans, and therefore we have to govern the ocean to the best of our abilities and ensure that we are deriving maximum benefit. It is for this reason that Ghana, under the President of the Republic, has come up with a sustainable ocean planning, which will make sure that by 2025, all these plans are available for managing the oceans. Ghana has also been part of the 30-30 agreements which took place in Canada last year, as well as the 2050 African Integrated Maritime Strategy, which looks at sustainable exploitation of the ocean space for wealth creation. Within Ghana, the NDCs come up with our climate targets, which ensures that, or they are working to ensure that by 2030, 64 million tons of greenhouse gases emissions reduction, and also to avoid 3,000 deaths from improved air quality, create over 1 million jobs as a result of this. And in total, there will be 39 million beneficiaries from the climate actions that Ghana is taking. On biodiversity, as Zia said, we want to bring areas of high biodiversity loss close to zero, and also ensure integration of biodiversity into our marine spatial planning and marine protected areas, as well as restore degraded areas and aquatic environments that needs to be conserved. In June or May-June of this year, the president, under his guidance, organized the Blue Economy Summit for Ghana, the first of its kind, to look at the issues that have been discussed by the Ocean Panel, and which includes enhancing human relationship with the ocean, increasing ocean knowledge, working with diverse stakeholders, and bridging the gap between ocean health, wealth. And one of the new issues that was introduced, more so when we are in the Gulf of Guinea, is maritime security. So the outcomes of this meeting was the recommitment to SDG 14, ensuring smarter financing of the blue economy, recognizing the interrelatedness of the ocean and practice on land, and also create strategic partnership with the private sector and other institutions to ensure oceans health. Now, with our ocean planning, we have the presidency being the hub for where all these activities are taking place. There is an SDG advisory unit which is in charge, and a 15-member institutional working group has been empaneled to ensure that the ocean activities, particularly the sustainable ocean planning, is carried from the policy level to people in the street. So mostly we have participated in global learning events to ensure that our process aligns with other country processes. We have engaged international experts from Norway, Britain, and other areas to help us learn from their experiences. Media engagements have been done to popularize the blue economy and also the sustainable ocean governance, as well as the sustainable ocean planning. We have gone down to the regions in national, regional, sub-regional consultations to ensure that all stakeholders are engaged, including those in the oil and gas sector, to establish the nexus between oil and gas exploration, ocean use, and coastal communities who are the frontline impacted communities. In all these, there are challenges that we are facing, and some of the challenges include: how do we sustain political support for the process? Do we have enough information about the ocean? How do we secure financing? As well as limited capacity in spatial planning, marine protected areas development, ocean financing, literacy, technology, science, innovation, conservation, as well as conflict resolution. The greatest of the challenges is the misconception by fishers that oil is actually obliterating their business, their traditional livelihood, and they have to be considered in all these debates as we move forward. And rightly so, we have been including fishers in the discussions and also bringing them together with the oil and gas institutions to debate the issues towards getting some finality and closure about how these things work in the international community. We are drawing heavily on the experiences of Norway to be able to guide the process to a conclusion by 2025. If you turn on to the next slide. Yes, there are critical issues that we have to resolve as we go along. One is that Ghana is yet to establish its first MPA, and how soon are we going to do that? We are working seriously towards that. We recognize that there is low capacity for marine spatial planning and MPA development, so we will need some assistance from our development partners in that direction. The other issue is that there is a high and latent human resource potential that can be catalyzed to get all these things going. Again, we have a permissive policy environment that will allow for the process to get to its logical conclusion. However, The major challenge here is that there are fragmented institutions with different interests. So when it comes to issues like this, you immediately see that there will be turf wars. And how do we encapsulate all these things, bring all these institutions together so that the differences could be minimized, and we move forward with the process that the president has asked us to develop. It also needs a rethink of the priorities vis-a-vis oil and gas development and fisheries. Next slide. Yeah, like I said, oil and gas has a lot of conflicts. And if I have to summarize these, I would say that fisheries is in the people's domain, whilst oil is not. The second is that the revenue generated from fisheries is about equal to the revenue generated from oil and gas. And therefore, we cannot easily wish fisheries away in place of oil and gas. They have to coexist. And we have to think through this carefully and ensure that both sectors are providing the necessary revenue for the country. Now, fishers have become very apprehensive because they think that gradually their traditional fishing grounds have been taken over by the oil and gas companies, and that oil exploration has been the cause of decline in the fishery sector. Now, fishers are also not allowed to get close to the oil facilities because of its sensitive nature. But again, these same facilities are the ones that are aggregating fish, and fishers think that they need to have a share of the fish that are being harbored under the oil rigs. Besides oil and gas, we are yet to look at other forms of development within the maritime space relative to energy development, like wind energy, wave energy, and the like, and also mining from the marine environment for other resources or metals. This is not yet to take place. But with all this in mind, we have to factor these dynamics into our SOP planning process and also the spatial planning, marine spatial planning development process, so that we bring everybody on board as we go along in the process. Next slide, please. Yeah, if you look at this map, on the left side of the map, you see how all the different colors which represent the oil blocks that have been allocated to oil companies. And these areas, again, are the areas that fishers from the East Coast, the West Coast, everywhere move to for their fisheries. And if these areas are being allocated to oil and gas companies, then it gives a real cause for concern. And we have to really sit down and look at the issues critically and see how oil and gas can coexist in the marine space. And this has to be clearly spelled out in the marine sustainable ocean planning process or in the marine spatial planning process, so that every sector knows their limits and how much they can impact on others. Next slide. Yeah, there are also, besides the challenges, opportunities. And the opportunities are that, one, there is imperative for marine spatial planning process and the creation of MPAs. The process has started, and we are hoping that within the next 4 or 5 years, we should be able to establish the first marine protected areas in Ghana. We will also like to ask partners who are interested to let us know the areas of interest so that we can work closely. We also have a penchant to include everybody in the planning process more so when people are very illiterate or not very literate about the ocean issues. We need to bring up the ocean literacy ideas strongly, so that from the primary level all the way to the PhD level, people will have to understand the process. And here I will encourage a lot of girls to be trained as marine scientists, so that they also find space in the marine ocean planning process. And finally, we also need to enable policies that will abate marine pollution from shipping and also from land-based sources of pollution. And most importantly, plastics, which are coming from land-based sources. We have to address all these issues in our planning process. So to conclude, I'd like to say that to have a sustainable blue economy, we need to have legal and institutional reforms. I'm saying this because most of the institutions that have anything to do with the marine space have their laws and policies, and we need to work to bring all this together in one pot and see how we can work with them to give away some of these mandates to what I will call a new and an accountable institution that will be responsible for the blue economy, so that we know that this is the go-to area when it comes to the blue economy. Again, mandated institutions for pollution abatement should be seen to be working to ensure that there is less pollution from land-based institutions into the marine environment. And for those that are working already in the marine environment, like the shipping industry, the port authorities, and others, as has already been indicated, all of them must work together to reduce pollution going into the marine environment. Oil and gas institutions should work to ensure that the fisheries livelihoods are maintained or enhanced. And finally, we want to say that when there is a political transition, whatever institution that is set up should be insulated from the political dynamics that go on, that if a new government comes into power, because they are not the ones that set up this institution, they want to look at it again and turn everything around. And finally, I want to say that in our sustainable ocean governance, policies must move from the boardroom to the ordinary person in the streets. I would like to end here and ask that if there are any questions, I should be able to take. Thank you very much.
Yes, fantastic. Fantastic, Mr. Coffey. Thanks a lot. I was absolutely in love of your encouragement of the girls and ladies to become marine scientists. As an oceanographer myself, I couldn't have found better place to be than this profession. So thanks for raising these aspects, but also thanks for raising the relevance of marine protected areas and the special planning to overcome fragmentation on the ground. And I heard from your presentation very strongly about how to manage conflictive activities that are economically relevant, but at the same time without create harm for our ocean. So we have the website, or actually the chat, to be more precise, full of questions, but I will put one that it's now very interesting considering what you just presented. Mr. Coffey, Teboho Nietzsche has a question about what precautionary measures does Ghana have in place to control and protect the resources, in particular the fishery resources, I understand as one of the major ones in this space, from oil spills incidents. And then we will wrap up to go to the next presentation. Over.
Yeah, I think that there are good policies and laws governing the fisheries sector, the issue of implementation has been a challenge. And with all this overfishing and all the distant water fleet in our marine space, and also the level of illegal fishing, which is more of organized crime, all these will have to be looked at in detail. That is why I was saying that in our planning process, we also give high priority to maritime security so that we bring on board the relevant law enforcement agencies to be able to handle the issues that are far away from what the eye can see immediately when you are on shore. So there are policies. Again, with the oil issues, we have an elaborate oil spill contingency plan in place that will quickly allow for movement into areas where there is need to stem oil pollution. And also there are very rigorous fines for institutions that are exploring oil in the marine space when it comes to spillage. So I think that they are extremely careful when it comes to spillage. Over the last 10 years, we have not seen that much of spillage from these oil and gas companies, and we are very grateful that they are doing their work very well, and we will continue to monitor them. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing the experience. Thanks for bringing on the stage the relevance of the partnerships, let's see, in order to take precautionary measures. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your presentation. And then friends and colleagues, allow me to take to invite on the stage our last panelist from Norwegian Environment Agency. I would like to
Okay. Letitia, we've lost you a little bit. I think her connectivity may be down. And Letitia, we lost you a little bit. We cannot hear you right now.
please go ahead.
Okay, Letitia, we lost you for a few seconds, but now I think we can hear you.
Okay, so I was inviting all to join the floor and take us to the Norwegian experience in managing conflict and collaboration in multi-sector space as the ocean. Øystein, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to UNEP for allowing me to share a presentation. I hope you all can see my screen now.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to share my webcam, so that's a pity, but that's how it is. Greetings from Norway. My name is Øystein Leknes. I'm a marine biologist by education. I'm also the head of the section for ocean management and marine biodiversity at the Norwegian Environment Agency. The Norwegian Environment Agency is an agency under the Ministry of Climate and Environment. I'm also the head of the Management Forum.
30 seconds. Yes, just to inform you that we've lost you for 30 seconds, and probably you need to restart. Over.
Okay, sorry for that.
No worries.
Dear all, my name is Øystein Leknes. I'm a marine biologist by education. I'm the head of section for ocean management and marine biodiversity at the Norwegian Environment Agency. The Norwegian Environment Agency is an agency under the Ministry of Climate and Environment. I'm also the head of the Management Forum, which is an advisory group responsible for delivering the knowledge base for Norway's integrated ocean management plans. Norway have had integrated ocean management plans for almost 20 years now. And the integrated ocean management plans are presented to the parliament as white papers every 4 years. The last management plan was approved by the parliament in 2020, and it's the big white paper you can see to the right on this slide. The purpose of the management plans is to provide a framework for value creation through sustainable use of marine natural resources and ecosystem services, and at the same time maintain the structure, function, productivity, and the diversity of the ecosystems. The management plans, they clarify an overall framework and encourage closer cooperation and coordination and clear priorities for management of Norway's marine areas. They also increase the predictability and facilitate coexistence between competing industries that are based on the use of these areas and their natural resources. Activities in each management plan area are regulated on the basis of existing legislation covering the different sectors. And the various sectoral authorities are responsible for implementing the measures set out in the management plans and the relevant legislation that they administer. This slide shows the process. What's important with the process is that we have two forums, the management forum and the monitoring group, that are responsible for describing the sea areas. They are responsible for putting together what we know about the environmental, how the environment state is, how the different activities are in the sea, etc. The knowledge base is compiled by the agencies that have the activities in the sea or have responsibilities in describing environmental status. And the monitoring group also coordinates the monitoring that is developed in the Norwegian sea areas. So the knowledge base for the new management plan is handed over to the steering committee, which is on the ministry level. They consist of ministries that have activities in the sea. They develop the knowledge base into politics, presented by the government. That is the new management plan for the parliament. And the parliament then approves, or in some rare occasion, reject the new management plan. So what's important for this process is that it's inclusive, integrative, and iterative, which means that it's updated every 4 years. To say a little bit more about the workflow and the content of the knowledge base. The content of the current knowledge base is summarized in the box to the right. It's a description of environmental status, particularly valuable and vulnerable areas, activities and pressures, conflict of interest, cumulative impact assessment, environmental objectives and achievements, risk of acute pollution, implementation of measures, marine spatial management tool, ecosystem services, value creation, and knowledge needs. An important part of the process is to involve stakeholders at several stages, both during the compilation of the knowledge base and when we start developing the integrated management plans. So as you can see on the figure to the left, there is stakeholder involvement in the startup of each cycle of compiling a new knowledge base. And there is also stakeholder involvement when the politicians are starting to compile the management plan that are built on the knowledge base. So to sort of show some examples on how we move from science and to examples, I would like to point out the work that we are doing on designation of particularly valuable and vulnerable areas. An important part of the knowledge base for the management plans is to designate and describe areas that are particularly valuable and vulnerable. These areas are identified by using scientific criteria developed and adopted under the Convention on Biological Diversity, the so-called EBSA criteria, that are uniqueness or rarity, species, special importance for life history stages of species, importance for threatened, endangered, or declining species and habitats, vulnerability, biological productivity, biological diversity, and naturalness. On the map to the left, you see the current particularly valuable and vulnerable areas that has been identified. And in the coming slides, I will say something about how these areas are then, the activities in these areas are adjusted according to the description of what is in those areas. It's important to remember that the designation of areas as particularly vulnerable and vulnerable does not have any direct effect in the form of restrictions on the commercial activities, but it indicates that these areas are areas where it's important to show special caution and where activities must be conducted in such a way that the ecological functioning and biodiversity of an area is not threatened. So this is a smaller sector of the picture I showed on the last slide. It's the northern part of Norway, and you can see the southern part of Svalbard in the upper area. And to the right, we have what we call measures for patrol activities. To show some examples. The knowledge base is the foundation for policy development, and the decision makers are forced to balance the need for value creation with environmental goals and climate goals. Based on monitoring programs, knowledge on key species and habitats, frames and measures for activities are developed. So the identified areas are to the left and the measures for activities are to the right. On the right-hand side, there are some blue areas. The dark blue areas are completely closed for petroleum activities, while the light blue areas are closed during the bird nesting period. In addition, there are several other measures like traffic separation for shipping lanes, and also closing of coral reef areas for trawling activities. We often struggle with missing data, and so we have developed a lot of huge scientific programs like the Mariano for seabed, CPOP for seabird population monitoring, and C-Track that are tracking bird when they're not nesting. And we are also working to further develop our management tools. I was also asked to say a little bit about the energy transition and how we are struggling to balance the need to stop climate change with a need for energy. As many of other European countries, Norway also have some ambition to develop offshore wind energy in Norwegian waters. So the governmental ambition is to open areas by 2040 able to generate 30 gigawatts, which is equivalent to the current energy production in Norway, which is mainly coming from hydropower. During the spring of 2023, a cross-sectorial group of agencies identified 20 areas that you can see on this map as suitable areas based on a trade-off between environmental impact, and conflicting human activities in the areas along Norwegian coast. These areas can support 30 gigawatt of production, but if any of these areas are to be further evaluated, a more thorough and specific impact assessment is needed, because there is a lot of things we still don't know about the environmental impact from wind farms on the marine environment. There is also a major push to protect our blue forests. In Norway, blue forests along the coast are mainly kelp forests, seagrass beds, and those are important in order to capture and CO2 from the atmosphere. And we are also working very hard to further decarbonize the shipping sector and other measures. What I mentioned earlier when I talked about the Norwegian management system and the legislation, it's important to keep in mind that they are an iterative process. Since they are updated every 4 years, we are always seeking to further develop the knowledge base for decision making and the management plans themselves. A new knowledge base always include a set of new knowledge needs. New management plans develop further measures and can adjust some of the environmental goals. The tools needed to support decision making are further and further developed. So we can see this as a sort of an everlasting, ongoing process with a better understanding, a better frame, a better management support systems for each iteration. I will also say something about cross-sector cooperation. So a very important take-home message is that, at least from the Norwegian point of view, a cross-sector cooperation is key to developing a complete knowledge base. Developing this knowledge base can be cost-effective, as the knowledge gathered can be used for many different purposes. And the cooperation and knowledge sharing is also a key to develop coexistence and to have a better mutual understanding of each sector's rarities. And also development of common tools for mapping activities and ecosystems can be used to develop frames for activities. Since this has been an ongoing process in Norway for 20 years, we are now starting to have very well developed maps of activities and also a good overview of where we have vulnerable seabed species and etc. So we have a good overall knowledge base that we can use to create our marine management plans. But we also started pretty much from scratch at some point, and the important take-home message is that every sector can contribute with something, and I think the key success for developing sustainable ocean plans in Norway has been the cross-sectorial collaboration that help us to at least agree on the knowledge base needed, and then it's easier for the politicians to make decisions and to weigh value creation towards goals for taking care of the environment. And with that, I complete my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and once again, sorry for not being able to share my webcam with you. Thank you.
No worries at all. Thanks for sharing the experience. Thanks for highlighting the relevance of the knowledge management platform or the knowledge management basis that encompasses all stakeholders as a foundational element of the decision making in order to overcome fragmentation and trigger cooperation and collaboration without harm of our oceans. So this was very interesting. I will, without any further delay, because we are a bit ahead of time, just address immediately one question for you, Øystein, in the same sense as I have done with the others, and then we will go for the Q&A, and I will put questions for all of you. But so far right now, Soraya Sundararanjan provides a very interesting question. She looks to see how effective UNCLOS guidance on marine spatial planning, specifically referring on how to harmonize conflictive sectors. It's been really effective in terms of providing a basis for Norwegian to use the marine spatial planning or the marine overall planning, and if there are any other frameworks, international frameworks that eventually were used as inspiration for the Norwegian existing system, law, and governance arrangements. Over to you, Øystein.
I'm not sure. I haven't been around for the whole period of time when we started developing our marine management plans, but I see that we were quite early compared to many other nations. But now we see that other international bodies and also the EU and other regional authorities, collaborations are catching up on us and maybe have advanced in, especially within I think MPA planning processes, and with EU adapting the MPA directive, etc. I see that we are no longer sort of first out with a lot of things in Norway. We are deeply involved in the UNCLOS negotiations and contribute with our sort of knowledge and experience from the National Marine Management Plan work. But yeah, so we are always seeking to find new ways to do it, and seeking inspiration from both other nations and from other international bodies. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks for answering. We are now, as I mentioned, over time, so I'll open to bring a number of questions that are popping up for us, just to flag that our audience is still above 330 participants, what is fantastic. I apologize since now that I won't be able to bring all the questions that we have in our chat, but I will definitely bring some of them, and you will find a way to continue this conversation any soon with all of you. But let me bring Mr. Lee back. Lee, it's really a great pleasure to address to you with what I think is one of the key, let's see, questions nowadays in the minds of several colleagues. There is some indication that the environmental impact assessment process, who does the environmental, the EIA process, who adjudicates these processes, and how the process or this kind of processes are actually regulated under UNCLOS. And I think this is related to a number of other activities, as the ISA is regulating now the seabed mining. I mean, how the environmental impact assessments are seen as an instrument, as a key instrument under the UNCLOS and several other governance arrangements. Over to you.
Thank you, Letitia, and thank you very much for the question. And I just want to recall that UNCLOS has the general provisions in terms of the state's obligation on the monitoring and environmental assessment, as well as the publishing the relevant reports from the assessments. And so I think that I just want to highlight the new BBNJ agreement really added to operationalize those provisions for activities to be carried out in the areas beyond national jurisdiction. I think I feel like the question was probably stressed to that. So because I think for areas within national jurisdiction, I think it's more clear. So like states would adjudicate all those, and so we'll have the jurisdiction over those. But I think for BBNJ agreement, so it places upon the parties obligations to assess the potential impacts of planned activities under their jurisdiction or control to be carried out in areas beyond national jurisdiction before those activities are authorized. So as a process, there are several consecutive steps. So starting from screening, and the scoping, and then impact assessment evaluation, and the measures to prevent, mitigate, and manage potential adverse effects. And there will be public notification and consultations, and the preparation and publish the EIA reports. The decision on whether planned activities are allowed to proceed will be taken by the party. So this is generally called a state-led process. The state is the party that has jurisdiction or control over the planned activity will have the say, just to put in another word. But parties will have the obligation to monitor and report on the impacts of any activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction, which they permit or engage in. So I just want to highlight that at the same time, the BBNJ agreement provides for a so-called call-in mechanism, which allows other parties to register their concerns in relation to an authorized activity with the party that authorizes it and with the scientific technical body to be established under the agreement, and that body could make recommendations on such decisions. I hope that answered the question. I think there's other parts of the question, the later part, in terms of the other developments. So the EIA is also among the major topics being currently negotiated on in terms of the draft regulations for the exploitation for mineral resources in the area under the ISA. So I'm not very familiar with the details of that, but I do want to say that many delegations do see the connection between the processes. And so this is also this webinar about the cross-sectoral cooperation and coordination. And so I do think that there are delegations definitely thinking that there should be some matching between what is being developed under the BBNJ agreement and what is currently being developed under the ISA. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Some cross-fertilization, or at least to taking advantage of the knowledge lifting for one and another. Let me now bring a question very interesting from Amado Pacule that would like to understand, and he speaks from Mozambique, and he is struggling as well with ocean pollution from oil and gas sector that is increasing in Mozambique, and the conflicts with other activities like fishing. So let me bring Mr. Coffey again back on the stage to say if there are some lessons from Ghana that could be taken advantage by Mozambique as well, as seems they have very similar issues.
Thank you very much. When oil was discovered and activity started, Ghana decided to dig deep into its reserves to ensure that what has happened in Nigeria will not happen in Ghana relative to oil spills and management, as well as pollution, oil pollution from the exploring companies. So a lot of laws were put in place, a lot of activities were undertaken, particularly by the Environmental Protection Agency, first starting with the Environmental Sensitivity Atlas along the marine areas to find which areas are very sensitive. Companies were made to have their own oil spill contingency plans, and also normal drills to ensure that when such issues happen, they are on top of their duty, and also they work closely with coastal communities to get them involved in the drills so they know what to do exactly when such occurrences become real. Now, with general pollution, there is a lot of legal instruments that bind the institutions or mandate both the regulatory institutions and also the polluting institutions, the polluter pays principle, for instance. So where companies have been found to deliberately pollute, they are heavily fined so that once they pay these fines, they can go back to the drawing board to ensure that they do not repeat such mistakes. So a lot of processes, instruments, monitoring going on just to ensure that these processes are kept under control. If we leave it to the companies and as governments, we do not come in with the strong arm to ensure that they are doing the right things, they will run over us and we will not be able to. I remember on some occasion, the company was asking, where is your law which allows you to fine us so much money? So we had to go back to the law to show them so that once it is punitive enough, they are very careful with the processes. So I would say by and large, we are trying to be on top of the issues, but you will not know when another one will pop up its head when you have not thought about such a risk. So it's an ongoing process, and we hope that we'll be able to be on top of the issues.
Indeed, it's all about collaboration and learning from the past experiences and from others. I can hear this very strongly from you. So let me bring you, Øystein, again, because several questions, and one that brings my attention or captures my attention is how have you, or if you could elaborate a little bit more on how in Norway you have designated an area as vulnerable. What are the specific criteria that you have been using it for it? And good if you also can, in the overall experience of developing the management or ocean management plans, relating to what just Ghana has mentioned about the conflict between different sectors. What were the trade-offs in the last version of your plan that you have had to face? So if you can tell us a little bit more. A pleasure to know from the Norwegian experience.
Yeah, I would just point out firstly that I'm just responsible for creating the knowledge base that the politicians are using to create the actual management plan. That being said, the knowledge base are pointing to a lot of vulnerable, especially these area work with designating vulnerable and vulnerable areas are very important, because the politicians in Norway have decided to not open for oil and gas activities in the most important areas for fishing in Norway, which is the Lofoten Vesterålen area and the coastal areas of northern Norway. So that is one example of how knowledge on productivity, spawning grounds, where you have the important species and habitats, and just making a decision that in these areas, which is the sort of main fishing areas of Norwegian in Norway, we are not allowing pollution from, or we are not allowing oil and gas activities. And this is because we are, although we have a very low risk of acute pollution from oil and gas industry, we have had very few incidents the last 20 years. Although there is a low risk of acute pollution from the oil and gas industry, we have just decided that these areas are too important to be open for oil and gas activity. And this is a political decision that has been made based on the overwhelming scientific evidence that is being presented for the politicians.
Yes,
That's,
thanks a
yeah.
lot for sending
And also, yeah, and also the same knowledge base can also be used to regulate activities that are allowed within certain areas, so that important spawning grounds and for instance special habitats like coral reefs, that they have even stricter regulations in these areas when it comes to what activities can be allowed. So I hope that answered the question. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks a lot. So we are running over time. I already apologize that we cannot address all the questions, but we will make sure the dialogue will continue. So now to close, in order to wrap up our discussion, I will address the same question and give 30 seconds for each panelist to give me a key takeaway. And this question, I think it's a question for now and it's a question for the future. That is, what is the role of women in the context of sustainable ocean governance? And if you can address this point, 30 seconds, and then I will finalize and revert back to Marisol. Who wants to start with this one? Kofi, I just can see you.
Yes, in our ocean planning process, we talk about equity and literacy. And these two areas, we think that we have to bring women on board quickly, because it is a very good way of ensuring that the process is holistic. And as we have it in Ghana, when you educate a woman, you educate a whole nation. So it is very important that we bring these young ladies, our mothers, on board in terms of the literacy and other related activities that will go on for a very long time. We cannot ignore the women.
Yes, thanks for that.
Well,
Being Suli, can I invite you?
Yes, I just want to say women can do anything and they can make great contributions. I just want to highlight the example of BBNJ process, the intergovernmental process, intergovernmental conference that which lead to this success was steered through by the President Rina Lee, which is a female ambassador from Singapore. And so like even my team is led by a female colleague, and so which played an important role. And more than half of the coordinators on the substantive negotiations in the whole process were also women. So which is clear show the role of women in diplomacy. And by the way, I think the day that the BBNJ agreement was adopted was the first International Day for Women in Diplomacy. But I think it's a great thing that we have seen more and more efforts under all platforms, and so to increase for example, women scientists, and I think to mainstream the understanding about the women's role in science. This is also very inspiring. So I would just hope to see more and more such efforts, and I do think that we will see progress in this regard as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So then finally you, Øystein, what is your takeaway about the role of female and women in the ocean governance?
I think that, of course, female should be involved in all processes that impact them. In Norway, we now see that we have more than 50% of women doing higher education. There's 50-50 both in the ministries and the agencies, and also among marine scientists. The women are coming up and leading the sort of development. What is still lagging behind a little bit also in Norway, and I think in most Western countries, is that the decisions made in boards of bigger companies and oil companies and so forth are still dominated by men. So we still have a job to do of making female CEOs that make decisions on behalf of big companies. Thank you.
Yes, excellent. Thanks for the honesty. And indeed, it's a walk that we walk together. And myself as a woman in leadership in ocean governance and in UNEP, I would like just to conclude this conversation with a question that was addressed to me to another woman, Lakshima Hagupati from India. And she was saying the plastic pollution is the major problem in the international law and in the high seas. So what is being done potentially to address this? And I would conclude saying that in my understanding, plastic pollution is one of the major, because what we have been discussing here is actually, it's a multi-sector and a myriad of issues and problems that have to be addressed at once in a cohesive and coherent manner, in a way that the outcome that we have of all of these threats are not to harm more our oceans, and even to create the space for the oceans to restore and to thrive. So my understanding is we are here not to face one, but as we discussed along the whole seminar, the webinar, there are a number of instruments in place, and this brings hope. There are much more female participation that also brings hope into the myriad of issues and solutions that we are here to address and put in place for this generation, for our generation and the future generations. With that, I would like to say it was a pleasure to have you in this panel. Thanks for inviting me to moderate, Marisol, and now I would like to revert back to you to the closure.
Okay, thank you so much. What a very interesting discussion and set of presentations. So I would really like to thank our panel of speakers and of course our moderator, Letitia, for getting us on a really good start for our webinar 1 out of 3 webinar series. Do you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Now we can hear you. You will also, we lose you for some seconds, but yes, we're back.
But it's really great to have been part of this first webinar out of a webinar series of 3. I think we're off to a very, very good start. It was a very interesting discussion and set of presentations. So I would really like to thank our co-organizers of this webinar, Government of Norway, of course, and also in partnership with our government partners such as Ghana, and of course, last but not least, our UNEP Freshwater and Marine Ecosystems branch, which is headed by Letitia. So I would really like to thank all of you for co-organizing and supporting this webinar. Finally, I want to thank my team here in Geneva, Sadika, who you will see now shortly, and our very able intern, Haodong, who has been in the back end supporting you and supporting all of our participants in getting your questions. I just wanted to note that there were a lot of questions related to understanding pollution and impacts in the ocean space from the energy sector. And I just wanted to bring your attention that this is a topic of our conversation for webinar 2. And there was a lot of interest also on planning tools related to marine spatial planning, but also looking at EIAs, environmental impact assessments, and strategic environmental assessments as planning tools. So we will come back to this under webinar 3. So I would really call on all of our audience to join us for the subsequent webinars. And also share it within your networks to join our subsequent webinars and our conversation. So with this, I shall turn to Sadika, who will talk us through the next steps from this webinar and how you can obtain follow-up resources. Sadika, over to you, please.
Good afternoon. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone, to our panelists, to our wonderful moderator, and of course to all of our attendees to what I think was a very engaging discussion. In terms of next steps, I just wanted to let you know that please complete our evaluation survey. It is essential to getting your certificate of participation. I have put the link on your screens, but it will also be sent to you via email directly in your inbox. After you complete your evaluation survey, within a week, you will get your UNEP certificate of participation. Now, during the discussions, many of you asked for us to share the PowerPoint presentations. I have included a link in the chat box with all of the PowerPoint presentations. I will also include it in your follow-up email, so you will have those in your inbox. Our next 2 sessions will be held in November and December. And as our audience, as Marisol just said, they closely relate to a lot of topics that you're interested in, such as the renewable energy, offshore oil, pollution risks, as well as planning tools like marine spatial planning. So I would encourage you to participate. Since you have attended our webinar, you will also receive our monthly newsletter updates. Now, for anyone that would like to circulate this webinar is recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Lastly, I would also encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, the link of which should be in your chat box now. Thank you so much for your participation, and it's been such an interesting discussion. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you. So I wish everyone a good afternoon and good evening.